Well, power to the people we certainly have between 7 and 10 every Friday night with the mother of all talk shows. So spread the word, and above all, use it. 0844 499 1000. That's the number to call to let me know what you think. Coming up, the theft of the pensions of Britain's miners.
Call me have a go if you think you're hard enough. Get it? The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway on Talk Radio.
We'll get you talking.
The Tory government didn't just destroy the miners' union. It destroyed the mining industry when we had 1,000 years of coal under our own feet, making us dependent thereafter on imported foreign coal, on imported foreign owners of nuclear power plants, on oil that we had to go halfway across the world to fight wars in order to protect our right to raid their oil under their countries at our prices. The devastation that all of this left in the wake of the defeat of the miners in 1984-5 and the desolation row that most mining areas became, not just in South Wales, the most obvious ones that I know well. I declare an interest. I'm an honorary member of the National Union of Mine Workers, South Wales area, Mardy Lodge, since 1982, in fact. But throughout Yorkshire and Derbyshire and the North East and the Ayrshire towns and villages and in the Lothians, everywhere where there was coal, there was left desolation after the smashing of the mining communities by the closure of their industry. All of that is well enough known and is a very considerable injury indeed, scars that will never, ever heal. But the insult that has been added to that considerable injury we're about to talk about now. The miners, I'm sorry to say, partly because they don't tend to live long because of the hard working lives that they had a gigantic surplus in their pension fund. And the government set out to steal it. And they have stolen between 8 and 12 billion pounds from the mining workers whose lives they wrecked. Now they want to hunt them all the way to the grave, picking their pockets. A young man, a lawyer, Peter Stefanovic, is a prodigious, powerful figure emerging on social media. He is one of the new members of the Labour Party, is speaking up all the time for Jeremy Corbyn, so maybe he'll tell us first off whether he's yet been purged, whether he's a Foo Fighters fan. But Peter Stefanovic is a lawyer who, unpaid, is working in support of the miners on the great UK mine workers pension scandal, and he's joining me now. Peter, thanks for coming on the show.
Hello. Hi there, George. Many thanks for inviting me on the show tonight. George, you and I have met, and you know that I'm a straight-talking kind of guy.
Yes.
And for me, there's right and there's wrong. And having been a lawyer for 20 years, I think you've seen it all. A week ago now, I was contacted by Les Moore, and he's an ex-miner who had a story to tell which literally rocketed me from anger to outrage to what I guess I could only really describe as a deep sense of personal shame that an injustice as gross as the one he described to me could have been allowed to be perpetrated against our miners and our families. Now, I know, George, and you've just said this, that you've always been a staunch admirer and supporter of our miners. And like you, for me, a working class lad from the estate, these guys are national heroes. We know they literally gave their lives in the service of their country, working, in the most incomprehensibly dark and dangerous conditions imaginable, just to keep our homes and our hospitals and our schools warm. Now, generations of these guys, George, paid into a pension fund, and they paid into this fund literally literally with their blood, their sweat, their tears. Many, as you just said, paid with their lives. They all sacrificed their health. Many are now suffering slow and lingering deaths because of the conditions they worked in. We're losing about 8,000 of them a year to chronic health conditions. And these men pay into this pension fund for one reason and one reason only. They want a better life. They wanted a better quality of life for themselves and their families when they retired. And they saw the one that their grandparents and their great-grandparents had had. Now, I get really, really angry, as you know, about a lot of these issues, but this, had me bursting with anger. We get to 1994, and the coal industry is privatized under John Major. And a deal is struck which enables, as you just pointed out, successive governments to rob, and rob's the only word to use here, the miners and their families of a staggering £8 to £12 billion. And I have to say, some of the miners I've spoken to think that's a conservative estimate. And it's leaving miners and their families destitute. Now, what happened was the government agreed at the time that it would underwrite the miners' pension on the condition that it could take an extortionate 50% of any surplus. Now, the Treasury's recently confirmed in response to a miners' FAY request that this deal has not cost the government a single penny, not one single penny, George, yet it's enabled successive governments to ransack the miners' pension fund of billions and billions of pounds. And of course, at the same time, the government's bailing out these greedy, negligent banker friends with purchases of loan and shares with taxpayers' money. So you literally could not conceive a novel with this sort of injustice. Now, we have John Major, who was the first robber baron, if I can put it that way. But Tony Blair then comes along, and he's happy to carry on with it. In 2003, when stock markets were depressed, the Blair government was taking a whopping 400 million quid a year out of the miners' pension fund, which actually threatened its very existence. And putting that into context, George, miners at that time were getting an average pension of about 40 quid a week. And some older members were getting as little as £10 a week. Now, it's difficult for me to even comprehend that the government, and we're talking about a Blair government right now, can rob the miners of 400 million quid in a year. It costs them nothing, not a single penny. And some miners are only getting 10 quid a week in return. I mean, you just can't make this up. The Tories, of course, were even worse. They took a whopping 750 million quid from our miners in 2014. It's just extraordinary. And I've only been looking at this for a week. So what I'm still trying to do, George, is put all the pieces together as to how our miners, and we're talking at the time 400,000 of them, could have been duped and ripped off in this way. Now, from what I can actually find out, and there's very little information out there, and we can talk about this in a moment, but from what I can find out, it appears that two of the parties to the deal were the government and British Coal. But, we have to remember that at the time, British Coal was still a nationalised industry. So in reality, the government would have been negotiating with itself there. And the third party appears to have been the pension fund's original trustees, which, as far as I can discern, would have been just a handful of men making a decision that would affect 400,000 miners and their families. Now, I've heard stories from miners, I've not had this corroborated, but I've heard stories from miners that an actuary report was obtained by the government, and no one seems to have seen it, which recommended an 85-15% split in surplus in favor of the miners, which the government subsequently ignored, deciding to shaft every miner in the country with a 50-50 split. Now, there are many, many unanswered questions which Les Moore and his group, the UK Miners Pension Scheme for Justice and Fair Play, have been trying to get answers to. And these questions are, was the actuary report shared with the trustees? Did they get a report of their own? Because you would imagine that the trustees of the pension fund would have a fiduciary duty to get one? And why was this not put before the miners? I mean, it's an absolute staggering scandal. It really is. And remember, of course, the deal was never going to be a risk for the government because, as you pointed out, sadly, miners have a very short life expectancy on retirement. And the government and its actuaries will have known this. So it's not surprising the scheme hasn't cost the government a penny. The government simply duped and ripped off good working men. That's what's happened here. I mean, the whole nation should be in outrage.
It is a frankly staggering story.
And, it is. It's incredible.
It's equally staggering that it's taken Les and his group and you to bring it to national attention. Everyone listening here, and especially every miner in the country, needs now to be writing to their MP, asking them to investigate this scandal. Was there an actuary's report? Who drew it up? Why wasn't it accepted? Why, instead of 85-15 as a split, it was decided to go 50-50? Why miners on very miserable pensions have lived, and many of them will have died, in poverty with pitiful pensions when that kind of surplus could have made their last years on earth more comfortable after the hard-working life and the trauma of the strike and the closure of the industry and so on had taken. What happens now? What's the next stage from the point of view of the campaign group and you?
Well, my view, George, is that there should be a public inquiry. There is no other way that our miners are going to get these questions, these unanswered questions, answered. There should be a public inquiry. And I believe that there should be a renegotiation of the 50-50 split of the pension surplus to make it more equitable. And I think miners and their families should be reimbursed the loss this gross injustice has inflicted upon them. Now, there is going to be a rally in Liverpool, and every miner out there and every member of the public that wants to support the miners should know this. It's going to take place in Liverpool on the 27th of September at 12 noon in Derby Square. And I think this is going to be the largest gathering of miners and their families since the 80s. And, you know, to put this into context, I suggested to Les Moore, why not a march? Why a rally? And he said to me, Peter, we can't have a march because most of us are knackered by the job. We've got knackered knees, we can't walk, we've got chronic lung conditions, you know, we're literally dying. These poor guys, you know, literally gave their lives for this country. And we now have to stand with them. And you kind of hit on another thread of the story a moment ago when you were saying, you know, why did it take me and you to get this into the public domain? Les and his group contacted me last week quite simply because mainstream media was refusing to answer their call for help. And we know 81% of mainstream media in this country is now owned by, six different corporations, all with its own political agenda. None of them were interested in helping our miners.
Not many of them give much thought to the miners now or yesterday.
They don't care, George. And
Peter, I've got a break now, so give me that date again. In Derby Square in Liverpool.
It's the 27th of September.
27th of
Derby
September.
Square, Liverpool, 27th of September, and we need the entire country to be there for our miners.
I give you a promise that I will be there. Now, we did ask the ministry to put up a spokesman, but they were unable to. However, they have provided this statement. The government has given considerable financial support to the mining industry to date and continues to guarantee that pensions will be paid. Those who are members of the Mine Workers Pension Scheme have received pensions approximately 30% larger than would have been the case without the guarantee, and these will continue to rise in accordance with interest rates. What do you say to that, Peter?
I tell you what I say to that. It's almost like a silly analogy that someone gave me during the week. And the silly analogy was, some guy said to me, well, look, miners asking to have money back is a bit like someone saying to their house insurer, I want money when they haven't had a fire. But it's not. This is like you having house insurance for a fire, and your insurer says to you, I want 50% of the equity in your home, whether you have a fire or not, and I'm going to keep that 50% equity. This is an absolute scandal. We want to know how a deal could have been struck wherein the government is able to lift out of the miners' pension fund probably, I would say 15 to 20 billion pounds. It doesn't cost the government a penny, and the government knows it's never going to cost them a penny because miners have such a short, sad life expectancy. And it hasn't cost them a penny. It's an absolute. There should be a public inquiry to find out what went on behind closed doors that duped the miners into this agreement that has robbed them and their families of the future they should have had. This money should go to not just miners and their families, but to the mining communities.
To the communities, yeah.
And destroyed.
Well, I'll tell you what, Peter, I promise you this. Now that you have brought this to my attention as it was brought to yours, I'm never going to let it go. It's a matter of honour. That's Peter Stefanovic, an extraordinarily powerfully persuasive advocate for the miners and indeed for Jeremy Corbyn, and typical of the new layer of activists that have become involved in politics in the Corbyn era. And I think any of you who heard him tonight agree with me that he's a very eloquent and persuasive man indeed.